Where were you, Don? You didn't come last night?
What I like about the Aga Khan is that it looks at the particularities of the architectural discipline. Its formal inventiveness, its spatial dexterity, and its material attentiveness.
So the Aga Khan Award is the only award in the world that recognizes that architecture is part of a larger net of activities that will try to solve the problems of the built environment.
It's very important to focus on the people.
It is our duty to pay attention to the very philosophy of this Aga Khan Foundation and the Aga Khan Prize for Architecture.
What makes it significant is that it's the only award that talks about architecture and development. That's what makes it unique.
The efforts that are made to visit every single shortlisted project, to photograph it, to meet with all the different actors, to acknowledge the complexity of architectural projects, the number of actors involved, and to really see the effect that architecture can have.
On-site reviews is giving you a clear understanding of the project.
What happens is that they give you an insight to the fiber of the project, what happens under the engine, as it were, rather than what you see on the facades.
It was extremely difficult to bring the 20 shortlisted projects down to 6. All of the 6 have different values.
In every cycle, we see some different approaches, some different selection criteria from the juries.
It's very interesting and impressive to see how these projects are really taking in account the daily life, the environment, the existing.
What characterizes the winners of this year's award is people-centered, transformative, and inspirational.
It's more than an award, actually. It's like a fantastic open library that allows us to travel through time, like almost like a journey through time that allows an observatory of the different ways architecture could deal with sometimes very hard geopolitical situations.
Good afternoon. Established in 1977, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture holds an eminent place in the realm of architectural recognition and preservation. Founded by His Highness the Aga Khan, the spiritual leader of the Shia Ismaili Muslim community, the award distinguishes itself by celebrating architectural excellence that not only exhibits aesthetic beauty, but also significantly impacts the quality of life for the communities it serves. The prestigious award seeks to promote design and construction that is not only environmentally sustainable, but also socially and culturally responsive, fostering a deep respect for diverse architectural traditions. Through its rigorous selection process, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture has continuously highlighted innovative projects that address contemporary challenges while preserving and promoting the innovative projects, preserving and promoting the rich architectural heritage of different societies, making it an inspiration and a symbol of architectural excellence on a global scale. Over the years, this award has made a fundamental impact on numerous communities in the Islamic world and inspired many, many young architects. Those of you who know me, who are familiar with my work, know that my journey in Islamic architecture started after reading Robert Ivy's interview with His Highness Aga Khan in Architectural Record, which I think was published in 2002. I found the interview so inspiring that I decided to continue my research and postgraduate work in this field. As we convene on this panel today, my hope is that the discussions and insights shared here will serve as a source of inspiration and perhaps have a transformative impact on your own journeys and aspirations. It's my pleasure to invite Zach Karim, a representative of the Aga Khan Council for the Northeastern US, who is in charge of leading their external communications, to share a few words in the beginning of this panel.
Distinguished speakers, invited guests, friends, good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. This is a really important discussion, and I'm really looking forward to engaging with the panel. When I spoke with Professor Garpour a few days ago, he told me, okay, you have 5 minutes. Please send me your slides. And I was like, what? Slides? I'm supposed to prepare slides? So I said to him, I said, oh, I won't have slides. I went back and I thought about it, and I said, this is a lecture on architecture. We like to look at pictures and slides. So I said, okay, fine. I'm going to put a slide deck together, so hopefully you will enjoy the presentation. In my opening remarks, I will start off by giving a brief background of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, explain who the Aga Khan is, and who are the Shia Ismaili Muslims. I will close with some exciting updates on the establishment of an Ismaili Jamaat Khanian Center here in the United States. Now the trick is if I can do, there we go. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture, as you heard, was established in 1977. And is considered one of the most renowned and prestigious awards of its kind. It plays an important role in influencing global architectural discourse and promoting innovative solutions to problems faced by many societies. At its inception, architectural discourse reflected Western preoccupations. There was a vacuum of knowledge of the architecture of Muslim civilizations. The award championed many of the concerns that are now common today: sustainability, human scale, climate adaptation, and quality of life. To address these issues, the award is given every 3 years to projects that set new standards of excellence in architecture, planning practices, historic preservation, and landscape architecture. Attention is given to building schemes that use local resources and appropriate technology in innovative ways, and to projects likely to inspire similar efforts elsewhere. His Highness the Aga Khan said during the Aga Khan Award for Architecture 2013 ceremony held in Lisbon, and I quote, "The award was designed from the start not only to honor exceptional achievement, but also to pose fundamental questions. How, for example, could Islamic architecture embrace more fully the values of cultural continuity, while also addressing the needs and aspirations of rapidly changing societies? How could we mirror more responsively the diversity of human experience and the differences in local environments? How could we honor inherited traditions while also engaging with new social perplexities and new technological possibilities?" End quote. His Highness the Aga Khan is the 49th hereditary Imam, spiritual leader, of the Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims and a direct descendant of Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. A graduate of Harvard University, he has stressed the role of the intellect in faith and has promoted an understanding of Islam that draws on the values of generosity, tolerance, pluralism, forgiveness, stewardship of God's creation, and the unity of shared humanity. The Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims are a culturally diverse community living in over 25 countries around the world. They adhere to a 1400-year tradition of Shia values that are expressed through a commitment to a search for knowledge for the betterment of self and society, embracing pluralism by building bridges of peace and understanding, and generously sharing of one's time, talents, and material resources to improve the quality of life of the community and those among that they live. In March 2018, an announcement was made to confirm the intention to establish an Ismaili Jamaat Khanian Center here in the United States, in Houston. The Ismaili Center Houston will join several prestigious buildings commissioned over recent decades by institutions under the guidance of His Highness. This is designated under the broader category of Ismaili centers, of which there are diverse examples in Dubai, Dushanbe, Lisbon, London, Toronto, and Vancouver. These centers have sought to create environments that encourage mutual understanding and facilitates the sharing of perspectives across peoples of diverse faiths, traditions, and origins. Resonating with their respective geographies and urban contexts, these centers have become known for conveying in architecturally diverse idioms the Ismaili Muslim community's ethos of pluralism and its humanistic outlook, enabling tradition to converse with the contemporary. In his speech for the inauguration of the Ismaili Jamaat Khanian Center in Houston in 2002, His Highness the Aga Khan said, and I quote, "The center will be a place of peace, humility, reflection, and prayer. It will be a place of search and enlightenment. It will be a center which will seek to bond men and women of this pluralistic country to replace their fragility in their narrow spheres by the strength of civilized society, bound together by a common destiny. It is already a symbol of the hopes of people who live through the change and turbulence and have ultimately found security and opportunity here in the United States. In this time of geopolitical uncertainty, conversations like today's are important, where we focus on what binds us together versus what keeps us apart. Architecture does just that, and I look forward to hearing our distinguished guests reflect on the importance of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Thank you.
Our first speaker today is Professor Hasan-Uddin Khan, who is a distinguished professor emeritus of architecture and historic preservation at Roger Williams University. He has lived and worked all over the globe as an architect, educator, and writer, and he has practiced in England and Pakistan. He helped set up the Aga Khan Award for architecture in 1977 and was its second convener, and worked for the Aga Khan Trust for Culture from 1983 until 1994 as head of architecture and director of special projects. He was the founder and editor-in-chief of the journal Mimar, Architecture and Development, and academic editor of the International Journal of Islamic Architecture. His current research focuses on contemporary architecture and urbanism in Asia, with a focus on Pakistan, and maintains a consultancy architectural practice. He is the editor and author of 9 books, including The Religious Architecture of Islam, Le Corbusier, Chandigarh and the Modern City, International Style, and Contemporary Asian Architects.
Thank you for that kind. I'm actually going to talk and present something that is pre-Aga Khan Award as a way of helping us understand where the award has been coming from. I've been involved with the award, as Mohammed said, since the beginning. It's almost 50 years ago, I suddenly realized, much to my horror. But anyway, one of the things I'd like to just talk about is questions talking about identity in architecture and the search for excellence, which has been referred to in the past. His Highness the Aga Khan built a great many institutions for his own community all over the world, and which he inherited some of these institutions from his grandfather, and then he continued doing that over time and building upon them. I'm going to start with a sort of story of an architectural journey, hopefully. Am I pressing the wrong thing? That one, thank you. Yeah. He built religious buildings around the world. And what's interesting, we're talking about the early 60s, 70s, in which these happened to be Jamaat Khanas, which you've just seen a few of. They were really based upon the architecture which is traditional, or architecture that was almost colonial in some ways. And I think he felt, and I'm now interpreting through my experience some of the things he was perhaps thinking about, hopefully. And he was thinking about the need to change these colonial models for something that was more contemporary and modern and applicable to us in the 20th century onwards. So he then builds what I would say was the beginning of the journey for the Aga Khan Award. And this is to do with the largest project of the time when he was building a hospital and medical school in Pakistan. He commissioned some architects who were young architects in those days, Payette Associates of Boston, who then, a number of them went around the world looking at Islamic architecture. You know, it's from the Alhambra to other projects, for instance, in other countries around the world. We went to Isfahan, and you looked at the Mughal architecture in India. They looked at it. And they came back with the idea of saying, could we interpret some of these ideas into a new contemporary architecture in the Islamic world and for Muslims, not just in the Islamic world? So he sets up an award. Well, he actually sets up to design this building. In 1970, this project is commissioned. two Payette associates, who then, 40 years later, still involved in this hospital, which has grown and grown. And you can see the sort of master plan of it. And what it is, essentially, is developing a kit of parts and around the spine of a building. Around the spine of a building, and a series of courtyards. So these were interpreting, if you like, certain kinds of architecture. It was actually, I joined this project in 1972. This was my first project just after I'd become an architect, and so I got involved in this at a very early stage in England, where it was being designed, and learned a great deal about architecture through my involvement in this piece. The project used the courtyard as an organizing element. It was based on wind catchers almost. You can see the wind catchers on the top. Series of courtyards, landscape as part of the tradition of Islam. And I believe that this is the piece that started his journey into architecture. So it was a modern interpretation, if you like, of the vernacular and Islamic architecture, the major gateway that you come into a place with, as a darwaza, as it's called. The use of materials like marble, so moments that marked a threshold in which you entered a part of the building with devices of this kind. Materials that we use from very rich marble down to the simple terracotta brise soleil, which allows the air to pass through as in it. It was going to be in white. The building was going to be in white. And when Tom Payette went around Pakistan into the desert, the Sunnis sort of looked at the architecture there and said, white would be a very stark finish to the building. And so they ended up with this thing called a weeping plaster, which he actually saw at some of the vernacular buildings in Sindh, and decided to develop this weeping plaster and these ideas of the shade. So it really is a kind of a hybrid building using the vernacular in some ways into a modern idiom. He felt, I believe, there was a need at that time to create a wider conversation about architecture for Muslim societies, which he had problems that he dealt with, talked about identity. Who were the Muslims? Where were we? What did we do? With the idea that it needed to be a much wider piece. So about 1974, he announced the idea of creating an award. And he did this in Bangladesh and then later in Pakistan. And so he said, I'm going to create an award which would start a dialogue and a discussion about architecture that was different from what was happening in America and the States at that time. There was a famous New York Five who were around, Peter Eisenman and company, for us who know that lot. And the discussion was architecture for architecture's sake, perhaps. I'm simplifying it a little bit. But he felt there needed to be a different discourse about architecture. And so he said, I'm going to do this award. Somebody sort of reminded him a couple of years later and said, Your Highness, you made an announcement about this thing. What's happened? And he said, yes, no, we will do it. And he was very serious because he felt that he needed to do something that was different. The question was, what was going to be the architecture that he was going to support? These are, just some idea. And was there such a thing as Islamic architecture? An architecture for Muslims? How did it present questions of identity? And so, in a slightly different way, he thought about architecture, if you like, as a gift. Now, in Islam, there is a tradition of the gift, but it also places an obligation. This is from something that actually Michelle pointed out, reminded me of a book called The Gift. And so it's about a moral obligation to society, which he felt she had, and the hope that there would be a reaction and acceptance of a conversation about architecture. So it's not just a gift, there's a reciprocity expected. Not saying that if I give you something, I want something back, but there's this tradition of giving something, and it's in the tradition of religious endowments in Islam, the Waqf. It's in the tradition of the stewardship, the notion of stewardship in Islam. And so I really do feel that his ideas of this, the freedom of the gift and an obligation inherent in it, and his generosity to the general public and people was one of the things that was coming back to us. So he created the Aga Khan Award at the end of 1976. It's actually 1977 is the date that is used as the moment of the awards. But the first meeting which I went to, which I was involved in, was in December 76. So that's, I'm not sure it counts as 77 was the beginning of a conversation. And what he did was he sort of said, what am I going to do? How do I create an award? And he brought about what is the first steering committee of the award. The first group of people who advised him as to what the award is going to be about. And I think some of us will talk about that later too. And he set up the steering committee. This is the first steering committee of the award. Some people are no longer with us, and some are. Maybe I'm the guy on the left, but anyway. And His Highness, this is, I've always liked this photograph. It sort of gives the spirit of starting something new and being part of a new adventure. The first award identified essentially 5 subjects, 5 areas of interest, if you like, from housing, housing for masses of people, public buildings and spaces, community planning, restoration, and then the use of technology, both traditional and very modern. And then there was a call for sort of innovative practice. At that time, the idea was they would recognize there'd be 5 prizes given to 5 projects. They were going to be chosen by a master jury, and the master jury was independent from the steering committee. The steering committee sort of set up these ideas, and the jury then looked at these projects, which you see in the process talked about in the film, and they were going to be $100,000 each. Now it's $1 million, so the prize has changed from 500,000 to $1 million. And this intention was changed by that master jury, the very first master jury. The first master jury, instead of giving 5 awards in 1980, gave 15 awards, which completely shook the ideas of what the award is about to start with. And that is kind of interesting. And I remember I happened to be the sort of person standing there looking at the choice. I had nothing to do with this, and when they chose, this is the jury that was there at that time, made of economists, historians, architects, some very well known from different parts of the world. This is all online, you can find this stuff. So the range that this was chosen for the 15 were sort of from high-tech buildings to others, and I'm not showing any of these buildings, but they're available. And what it did was change the discourse about architecture, I believe, to thinking about what the response of the client, architect, builders were to architecture. And architecture is not just the purview of the architect, but of society as well. And that's when the conversation changes from architecture for architects to this wider realm of what architecture was. It was, as I mentioned, an alternative to what was going on at that time. It changed the discussion, I believe, about architecture in general, not just for the Islamic world, but in general. And I think it's one of the most important things that the award has done, is change that discourse for us to begin to think about people and what it's involved in. So, the Architectural Award continues. This is Ilham Iqbal, who's a philosopher and writer from Pakistan, who said, you know, the search is on for it's a journey. It's a journey and a search for something of excellence. People use the word excellence, which has been done. And that the award continues this search for worthy projects as exemplars. It's one that really the award still follows. And these examples are very diverse, and you maybe see some of these. But it really is about that. And I would just end by reminding us that architecture is not about buildings. It's really about people. And the award has always believed that, and I believe continues to do so. So the beginnings of the award continue in the way that they started. Thank you.
Our second speaker is Nasser Rabbat. Nasser Rabbat is the Aga Khan professor and the director of the Aga Khan program for Islamic architecture at MIT. His interests include Islamic architecture, urban history, modern Arab history, contemporary Arab art, heritage studies, and post-colonial criticism. He has published numerous articles and several books on topics ranging from Mamluk architecture to antique Syria and the 19th century Cairo. His most recent book is Writing Egypt, Al-Maghrizi and his historical project. His co-edited book, Construction as Destruction, The Case of Syria, will be published in 2024. Professor Rabbat has worked as an architect in Los Angeles and Damascus and has taught at several international universities. He regularly contributes to Arab newspapers and consults with international design firms on projects in the Islamic world.
Who is the Indian goddess that needs more than two hands? I actually need now a third hand to carry on my lecture. But I'll try to make do with the two that I have. Thank you, Mohammed, for the invitation. And I had a wonderful afternoon today at UMD in Matt and Georgina's studio. I very much actually appreciated the discussion that we had. And my talk today is not necessarily about the Aga Khan Award as much as about a phenomenon that I've observed in the Aga Khan Award over its almost 40 years of life that would be of benefit for our architectural discourse in general. And it's very much related to the topics that I've discussed with the students this afternoon. So the Aga Khan Award has had a love affair with the vernacular since its establishment in 1977. Its engagement, however, grew and matured as the engagement of the Global South architectural community with the vernacular evolved, diversified, and acquired a deeper understanding of the vernacular's humanist promise in an age beset with racial, ethnic, and national clashes and economic and environmental disasters. In his inaugural, this image, you're going to see it another time, also, I think today. In his inaugural speech, at the first Aga Khan Award ceremony in Lahore on October 23rd of 1980, His Highness the Aga Khan declared that this recognition of a human scale of local decisions, even if they required outside expertise, of local needs and concern, is, I believe, a profoundly Muslim requirement. It is the expression of that social concern for thousands of separate communities. Oh, sorry. Oh, I forgot to move the slide. Oh, it's okay. So this is a slide for what I'm talking about now, for those of you who are wondering. Despite the scarcity of funds to nurturing a healthy sense of citizenship in the community, which has been empowered by its direct the whole balances the requirement of temporariness and safety with sustainability and economy to create dignified, sensitive, and enjoyable community spaces. Vernacular architecture. Here, this way. Now we need the last one. Here, okay, we're fine. Vernacular architecture has come a long way since the days it was brandished as a native response to location-blind modernist designs and the bureaucratic colonial and national authorities that imposed them. Along the way, it has shed the naive romanticism that marked its earlier adaptations to contemporary needs and restrictions. It has also transcended the puritanism of earlier vernacularists and entered the domain of architecture as a dynamic design category on par with high architecture. As Mark Grinson remarks, but most importantly, vernacular architecture has adopted a communal, dialogic design and building process that involves all the stakeholders. This is, of course, a political dimension that is acted upon by all the architects who partner with their communities. It is also implicitly understood by the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, whose continuous celebration of vernacular architecture has mirrored the evolution of its deployment in various contemporary contexts, both for its architectural nimbleness as well as its expensive civic capacity. Thank you.
Our last speaker is Farrokh Derakhshani, who is the director of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. He has been associated with the award since 1982, where his work has brought him into contact with architects, builders, and planners throughout the Islamic world. He is actually the graduate of Iran National University and an international fellow of Rabbat.
Thank you, Mohammed.
just I have to start with, I've known Nasser Rabbat for 38 years, I think, correct? And in all these years, we've been traveling around the world together, we've been to so many places together, but I could never compete with the way that he so eloquently makes sense out of things. So I always try to undo him in a way or not. So that's why when he was saying what he's going to be talking about, I said, now what I have to do, I have to switch it the other way around. So it was, I don't know how you came with this word, embracing differences, which actually embracing differences is a very nice way of explaining the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Aga Khan Award for Architecture all these years has been embracing differences. And differences is what makes our societies much stronger and how to go a step forward. I'm going to start here, I think, yeah. I was trying to find the other night, I'm always late, I just make my slideshows very last minute. So I was trying to put together some words. What are these words? What the Aga Khan Award for Architecture means. So these are 15 books which they have been published monographs for each of the award cycles. And then I was thinking, okay, what the award means, how you can just say what as like, words, keywords, where they are. And I thought that, through the titles of these books, it shows also an evolution of the whole process. So the first book in 1980, it was showing the 1980 project, which was published in 1983-4, actually. It was called Architecture and Community. So then, at that time, architecture and community was one of the words, as Nasser was explaining and Hasan was explaining, that those days it was not that much into the international architecture discourse. So the whole thing came about architecture and community. And then it continued, and usually the publishers, later when some of you will start writing about architecture, when you go to architecture to be published a book, they tell you, make sure you put the word architecture in your title. So on the third book, there was in our steering committee, we had a very enlightened philosopher, Muhammad Arkoun, and he was explaining that the award of that he had to be participating as a space for freedom. Space for freedom, it means space to be free to talk about issues about human life through a very different way. He was a philosopher, and he was the one who was trying to conceptualize the space as a space of dialogue. And this continued in the later years, talking about its architecture beyond the architecture, it is legacies for the future, and well, the book that didn't sell much was the one called Architecture and Polyphony, because they thought that in the bookstore they were putting it in the musical department side. So, because again, it was talking about polyphony. Each time you can see it's about differences, and it's not only about differences, it's how these differences can be complementary, and that is how we can send a message. So we had in the last 5 books that we have in the past years, we talked about essences, which is this being implicate and explicate. This is one of the other ways, how you can look within it is a part of also explains the way that these architecture has been built and taught. And then finally, we come with plurality, dialogue, and at the end, inclusive architecture. So that actually, the last book shows in a way, what means architecture? So what is our approach to architecture? How that inclusiveness becomes a sense of that you bring things together. Because what we're doing, in a way, the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, for the very first day, it was kind of, in the world of architecture, apples and oranges. Because you had, at that time, in 1970s, architecture was something, we're talking about architecture. Whatever was about slum upgrading or those things, those were development. It had nothing to do with the architecture world and the architects. When you're talking about conservation, it was archaeology. People didn't consider that as architecture because that was something which was specialized. And the vernacular at the same time, this was seen as something which is a group of people who are very nostalgic. But the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, for the first time, with the first jury, the 15 projects that Hasan presented, it was kind of seeing that all this together is architecture. Architecture is much further than just one building, which is architects. In some of my presentations, I use the cover of the Domus magazine. Domus magazine, like today, especially in the 1970s, it was the symbol of design. It was very design. And somehow the first steering committee, I mean, I really appreciate what they did. They really opened up and they brought the editor of the time of Domus, etc., to the ceremony, etc. And they published the mason that Nasser was showing, Aladdin, on the cover page of Domus. People all of a sudden, at that time, I was in School of Architecture. It was end of School of Architecture, I would say. No, I was not in school. I was finished. We're looking at how come Domus has got the face of a mason, an Egyptian mason on his cover page? Or when you had progressive architecture in the US or Architecture Review, they were showing slum upgrading in Jakarta, Indonesia, next to the conservation program, next to other things, which were just, I'm talking about embracing differences. This is what we have inherited. In 1980, what Nasser showed was Hassan Fathy. Hassan Fathy actually got the Chairman's Award. It was not a jury who decided. It was the Chairman's Award was something separate, was created actually for the lifetime achievements. It was very different. So, but what happened is that because the Hassan Fathy and those images were published, it became, everybody was saying, this is the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. It's about the vernacular. Nobody wanted to see in the same group of projects, there were the water towers in Kuwait, which was the high end of engineering of the time. There were another project, a hotel in Saudi Arabia done by Otto Frey and Gottborg. All these were just what is called the architecture at the highest technical, whatever you want to call it, the level of architecture. They were the juxtaposing all these projects. But people, the master public, they preferred to look only from the from the vernacular side of it, because it brought some nostalgia. It was very nice. It was very sexy in a way that you put it. The same thing is that when we're talking about ecology, because Hassan explained that one of the things was innovative. We have been I'm putting these two projects together. Both are the highest way that how you can use technology in its most sophisticated way. So one is a mosque in Niono, in Mali, with the mud structure. The other one is high-rises, the Petronas Towers. Now, one thinks that when they give the award to the Petronas Towers was also a kind of an aspiration of a whole society, of a country, of Malaysia. But it was not only that it was important that it's symbolizing something. It was the project was looked at from the way that how you do new skyscrapers. That building itself was an innovation in skyscraper building. It was the first concrete skyscraper built. And the technology was used by Cesar Pelli was the way the plan of the skyscrapers plan was designed. Usually what happens is that for those of you who've done any research on skyscrapers, it is you have a whole, all the shafts, all the elevators and all these things, they take the whole floor and you get very little space. And what you get is the spaces which have got no light on it. So here he came with a very innovative plan of how to bring light in all these 80 stories into people. So what I want to say is that when you look at a project, you're looking for excellence, and that was how the award has been doing all these years, and looking at innovation. And innovation can have all different kinds of manifests. We're talking about density, high-rise density, housing. Again, I'm bringing two different projects which were both awarded. It's the Mall Main Rise is a high-rise apartment house done by developers in Singapore. And we've got Shibam, which is they call it the Manhattan of the deserts. It's in the middle of Yemen. And these housing, because they have got this technology to build the houses are 7, 8, 9 stories, and they've been built over the years, and actually they're rebuilt. When you go there, in reality, all of them not very old. A lot of the buildings are being rebuilt all the time. But what was interesting in the housing that we're talking about, the Moulman Rise, is that how the architect worked with the developer in changing the rules, I mean, reinterpreting the rules of the society, having this very narrow skyscraper, in a way, it's just 30, 40 stories. But he brought in some elements of the traditional or vernacular architecture of the area, which he introduced in this high-rise vertical windows. What are vertical windows is what is used traditionally when it rains. The rain does not come in the if you've got a window, rain comes through when it's hot. But if it's a vertical window, rain never comes in, but the air always passes through. So by doing this, he created a space which was using less energy to cool it down, because it was always 30 floors. What he did was very important. He convinced, I mean, this is one of the most important jobs of the architects today, how you can convince your client that what you're doing is good for him. So by doing that, these architects, they gave to the developer much more space to sell. They made money out of it. So it was a win-win situation. Then they used that as a brand. This same company, using these architects, became a brand. So that is where we have to look at other ways of looking at architecture. Architects should not only do what they've been told to do, they have to put themselves in a position to help the client better understand what the project is and come up with a solution and convince them in a positive way to be able to make a better quality of the project that they have. It comes to the private houses. I mean, again, vernacular, as Nasser said. This is Al-Wakil, who was the disciple, whatever we call him, of Fatih. But what we're talking about, that in both of these buildings are built in villages. One is done by in Çanakkale in Turkey by Han Timur-Tekin. An extremely interesting contemporary building, which was called a building with 5 facades, because the roof is also seen as a facade. But how this was implemented in a village in Turkey, and how private houses, because sometimes when you talk about community architecture, because you've been seen 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it's not only about community. Architecture is not only that you have to only serve the poor. You have to be able to serve any client you have at the best way it is, even it's a weekend house for a rich Istanbuli businessman or someone else. It should be seen the same. When we're talking about here, Nasser explained what the primary school in Gondo, that was in 2004. But much before that, the award recognized how you use green buildings. I don't like the word green buildings, but that's what Kenneth Yang in Malaysia has started. That high-rise, it was done, this office building for IBM in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That, the Selangor, sorry, that was used, I mean, the way that he used the energy, because today we were in the studio, so one of the areas that you were talking about, how to best use the energy, etc. Here in 1995, we recognized, and one of the first of its kind in the world. So that is where it's not always what we learn from the West, which is being used in the South, or whatever it's called. This kind of thing, all these developments, they go together. The experience is done by the same people, but the architects in different parts of the world, and all of them are contributing to what today we have as our discourse. The same thing about landscaping and and climate. Today, climate is a very important aspect for us. We're all talking about buildings and projects which are doing with climate. Here we had a very interesting project in Turkey. In 1995, we had Charles Jenks. I don't know, some of you might have heard his name. He was on our jury. And we had received a nomination of a reforestation of the Middle East Technical University in Ankara. So while we were saying that, is this project eligible to become architecture or not, we presented to the jury. And then I remember very well, it was actually Charles Jenks and Peter Eisenman on the jury, both of them together. They were coming and they gave an award to this project. It was a reforestation, and explained that how reforestation is an act of urban planning, urban design, how you can form your cities, because if not, there were the encroachments was coming and taking all this land, and especially in Turkey, they built houses, etc. It was keeping it. So that has helped, this reforestation has helped Ankara, the climate of Ankara a lot. At the same time, there were some innovative ways of how do you do dry landscaping. In Riyadh, there was a project which got an award in 1995 again. It was just the dry landscaping and how you can have innovations in landscaping which doesn't exist, because most of the West is green. They don't have any idea of dry landscaping, and that's what that experience was done, and was done very well. And the last, I'm going to talk about heritage and conservation. This cycle, because we have been looking about heritage a lot, conservation of restoration of buildings has been done something forever. It's very important because at the same time, it's very important for each society because it's a kind of reinforcing the identities, because the people go also for the projects which are restored. It helps the identity of those cultures. But now what we have got, which we have given awards, 2 awards this time, is about recent heritage. Recent heritage is something as important as the heritage, because historically it doesn't matter if a building is 1,000 years old or 100. It is that what it has to do with our heritage, how we look at that as a part of our identity. This is Oscar Niemeyer's guest house, which got an award here, was a very good example that how we can give importance, and how that part, it's not outsiders, it's a part of the Lebanese heritage. And now they're working. That was all just to undo what Nasser was saying, and I hope that it's going to be very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite all of our panelists here, and our colleague, Professor Michelle Lamprakos, will be moderating this session. So of course, she doesn't need any introduction here. She is a graduate of the Aga Khan program at MIT, and she has served as a reviewer in 2 cycles of the award. So she's the best person to handle this conversation.
Thanks. Thank you, Mohammed. Oh, you don't want to have that behind you?
You want to have it? No, actually, it's not.
Okay.
You can leave it.
No, I'll stand to begin with, and then I'll sit. You want me to sit now? Yes. Of course, I have to listen to you, Nasser. You were my advisor. You'll always be my advisor. So. Very well advised. Yeah. So I just want to start out by saying that it's a real privilege to be here, and I want to thank everyone who made this happen at the University of Maryland and the 3 of you for being here. It's a privilege not only because, as Mohammed said, the Aga Khan initiatives have been so important in my career, and I hope that is shown in my teaching and interactions with all of you, but because the 3 of you are friends, colleagues, and mentors, and it's great to have this conversation. So, Farrokh, you anticipated my question and preempted it, actually, because I wanted to elaborate on the other side of the award, which might be closer to what we think of as high architecture, right? And so you've already covered that really well. I think some of the words we've heard about in Hasan's presentation and in Nasser's, as well as yours, were community, process, the vernacular, and dialogue. And I guess if I had to pick one common thread word, it would be dialogue. In a way, dialogue characterizes all of the award winners, but it also occurs at every level of the Aga Khan Award process and within the institution itself. And I was really struck by that as an on-site reviewer. So I was wondering if maybe the three of you could elaborate a little bit about the dialogue, which is not always friendly, right? It's sometimes heated arguments that occur within the award process, and maybe how those arguments have evolved over time.
When we're talking about dialogue, is that exactly what I was just trying to explain, and it comes that it is on two parties, and the two parties are the architect and the receiver, which is the client or the users. And when you look at all these projects which have won an award, all of them have been a dialogue between these, a positive dialogue, a fruitful dialogue, because the dialogues can be very destructive as well at the same time. And those are as a result, you've got the project which is good. So it doesn't matter if it's the whole community and the people who are the facilitators, or it's just a client of a high-rise with the architect, or the house with the, so it doesn't matter what they are. The only thing is this dialogue. Sometimes on one side, you've got many other, there are multiple people who work, and same thing. And it's not only that, because the architect is not the only person who's responsible for any project. Architect is one of the people. You've got structural engineers, sociologists, it's so many other disciplines, because once you look at architecture as a multidisciplinary discipline, then you see that there's so many people involved. And the whole thing is how best you can create that dialogue, which at the end, it comes up to a good solution.
He said everything that one could say. No, but I'm actually using the term dialogic, and I'm not using dialogue. In a sense, I'm interested in the process that exists in all of our aspects of lives, which is either decisions are being made by someone that has the authority to make the decision, and others are basically going out to execute that decision. And the other kind of decision, the decision that I have witnessed in the jury deliberations of the Aga Khan Award, but also that I'm claiming that the Aga Khan Award is recognizing in some of the projects that are being rewarded, is the fact that the decision is reached by an exchange between the multiple stakeholders, whoever they are. And I am trying to sort of like push for an argument that the best architecture is the one that takes into account all of these interlocutors, and that would allow them to take part in the decision of the building itself, whatever it is. I mean, whether it's a building, multiple buildings, a village, a city, whatever that is. So I'm actually interested in it again for the political aspect of it. It's basically a mitigation of the usual process of architecture, of a star architect, a sort of like a genius designer who is making the decision and executing it. Now, of course, a lot of them have said that we have dialogue with our clients, but there is still that essence of the genius. I personally am trying to celebrate the anti-genius.
I would just add that, in fact, the dialogue started within the award itself, right? It was the award sort of discussion of the steering committees, and then with the master jury and the people who went on site. And that dialogue then comes into the open, if you like, and is shared with a lot of other people. So this idea of the dialogue has been spreading into wider circles as time goes on. But it started really with the first steering committee who began to say, here's what we think the award should be focusing on. And then it changes from there.
You could expand on that, Hasan. In conversations that we've had, you told me that in the early years, there was a lot of discussion about what is architecture. Not only what is Islamic architecture, but what is architecture and what certain parties within the jury
Yeah.
more partisan of
Yeah.
higher architecture.
Yeah, there was a big discussion. Farrokh he showed us different aspects of it. But I remember in the very first jury, Kenzo Tange, who was a famous architect, no longer with us, I remember him sitting back, working his lips, saying, you're not talking about architecture. The award is talking about social projects, as you mentioned. It's about this vernacular. And we really need architecture. And this is a conversation that happened in the juries at different times, because some juries have sort of said, we shouldn't be awarding these buildings. And it was only Giancarlo De Carlo in the first time who suddenly turned around and said, we need to look at this very broad, and there's a compromise reached in the jury as to what should be awarded. That's why they ended up at 15. It wasn't just 5 or 6. They couldn't decide because some of it was architecture, some of it was social, some of it was building technology, and that range was amazing. And that's what actually set the pattern, I believe, for the future discussions about architecture. It's only recently, actually, that there have been 5 awards. Hasn't been 5 and 6 awards are sort of trying to sort of bring it down to an essence and say, here's some good examples of, and they're winners, but it's not a prize, first prize, second prize, etc. It's really about saying, here are directions in architecture that are terribly important. And that's what the dialogue threw up as a set of directions that we could be looking at in architecture, and I'll continue to do so.
So I would like to open up to questions from the floor. Matt.
So, sorry. Yeah, let's I usually don't need a microphone, but it's convenient. So thank you very much for those presentations. They're terrific, and I've always admired this program because the way architects have to solve problems is very authentic to me. There's a lot of these communities, they have to look at local materials, and they have to, understand the culture of how people use these buildings and the landscape, and also they don't have, they can't just stick air conditioning units on the side and pump all sorts of artificial air into buildings in many cases. But one thing that is interesting to me in this, and I'm wondering your opinion about where this might go in the future for the awards, is the world in which many of these projects reside is urbanizing at a remarkably fast pace. And many of these places are not urbanizing very well. They're either copying bad Siam, urbanism, or importing American shopping malls or God knows what and things. And I don't know the whole history of the awards program, but it seems like the awards program is a little bit more focused on individual buildings and projects that get realized. And is there any movement or intention or shift that you've seen in recent years to look at larger urban ensembles where some of the lessons, and the Islamic world has given us some of the world's greatest cities. I love them, and I think they're fantastic, and I love visiting them. But I'm wondering, is there a direction or a recognition that is a future sort of issue to sort of perhaps focus on in terms of praising projects and architects and things who are actually trying to do something about climate change, and also, the incredible densities of a lot of these cities are existing at, and of course how badly many of them are urbanizing in lots of places. I'm done with the microphone.
No. It is your question. This has been come to us a lot about, again, what Hassan was explaining, what is architecture? And when it comes, we said that we are very inclusive. So we have to see where are the limits, because nothing can be, just no boundaries. So the discussion about planning has come on and on, because what about planning? Because planning is a discipline which is very close to architecture. But as one of the rules of the award is the reviewers, they have to go and make sure the project is completed and in use and it works. So we have got when we write the eligibility criteria, it says for large-scale projects are ongoing, a portion of that project should be implemented and complete, so it could be evaluated that others. We have given many awards to very large. This first cycle, Kampong improvement programs, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people involved. So that was the largest. We have given for conservation projects. We have given to cities, city of Bukhara, city of Sana'a, etc. These are large. When you talk about scale, these are at the level of a city which have given the award. But in each of these cases, there were a tangible part of the project which was implemented and could be evaluated, and that's the most important thing, because unfortunately in planning, in the discipline of urban planning it's always long term, and you never know what it can be. It's very difficult to evaluate it. We did one seminar 8 years ago in Singapore, and we called it planning practices, because planning is urban. There's not urban planning, or it's about planning practices, and we try to open up this idea of that, how we can look at larger projects and schemes. We always encourage, but there are not that many that comes to our end.
Can I? So I'm going to go back to the point that Hassan had started. You only probably in this room, Matt, knows who Giancarlo De Carlo was. So, it's no coincidence that he was the accommodating Marxist thinker of Italian architecture, as opposed to Manfredo Tafuri, who was the more doctrinaire one. So I want to start with this and come into another anecdote. In 1992, we were looking for an Aga Khan design professor at MIT. And we invited few of the big names that actually many of them had been elevated by the Aga Khan Award. And one of them came in, and we were a bunch of idealist jury members, and we were asking this person, who shall remain nameless now, what can you do for the problems of housing, of environmental degradation, of economic inequality, and stuff like that? So he looked at us and he said, I'm an architect. You want me to design in a Turkish style? I'll do that for you. You want me to design courtyard style? I'll do that for you. Don't ask me to solve problems that architecture is not the proper way to solve it. So I will go back to why architecture is that. Kenzo Tanki is saying this is not architecture. What I am advocating in here is that architecture is not what Kenzo Tangi says architecture is, in order for us to start being able to address the issues that you're talking about. Namely, that architects, and I actually showed few examples clearly on a much smaller scale than what you are hoping for, but people who are recognizing the economic deficiency in our ability to intervene in the built environment, because we are not the people who are funding this. Even if we come up with solutions to the large urban problem, we need other people to make the decisions about funding. So until we are in a position either to secure the funding or to compel the funders to see the way we see it as the design intervention in the large problems, it seems to me that we are going to remain with the Kenzo Tangis of the world.
I would add just one thing, which is if you look at the shortlisted projects, there's even more of a range, right? And I think in the last, at least since I was working with the award, you started to have the shortlisted projects also visible on the website. So I think you'll find probably more urban examples in those, among those. Joseph.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Just really, really interesting talks, and I've been a huge admirer of the Aga Khan Award since I first learned about it. I'm an architectural historian, and I'm interested in how history can be used as a critique for contemporary architectural practice. It seems to me that this award does exactly that. But I do want to talk about Hassan Fathi's New Gorna project, and something that's always bugged me about it, which is the domes, which he borrowed from a little excursion to the Fatimid cemetery in Aswan. And he kind of lumps it in with the vernacular architecture. He kind of calls that part of the continuous architecture of the region, and therefore it's appropriate for New Gorna, for architecture of the poor. And it's not. It's a royal cemetery for Fatimids from the 10th century. I wonder if, in addition to the particularity of place, we might also get to the particularity of history, and through a more precise understanding of history, we might come up with a more robust critique.
I'd like to say that, Fathi brought together stuff from ancient Egypt and pharaonic architecture, proportion systems from Aswan, and the builders who worked with him came from that part of the world. They weren't local in Gurna. Aladdin was from somewhere else. And Fathi's idea was that he was going to create this, I would say, often a new vernacular, okay? He wasn't trying to create vernacular itself, because think about Fathi, who was my teacher, by the way. I was at the A in the late 60s, late 60s. He used to sort of suggest that architecture needed to take the best from many different places. And we know that he worked for Doxiadis, the Greek planner, and designed modern structures as well in concrete. So Fathi had this range of things that he considered. And amongst that was this, I would say, creation of this new architecture. And many people have written about, I have too, but about Gurna being a grand failure, because it didn't address the people it was supposed to. And yet he created a whole new image about the vernacular and what is local. So this conversation of Fathi's was very important in the 40s and the 50s, because he told us that there's an alternative. He came about the time when, if you remember, Eric Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. And Fathi and others were trying to look at an alternative way that was indigenous to their societies. And his society was wider Egypt, and in fact, partly the Middle East. And the irony is his architecture and buildings were often became used and commissioned by the rich. It was, so the question of how does one judge what is local and what belongs to a place really got shifted around, whether you think about Dan Merkert and what he does and other people. It's really a change from saying this has to be rooted in a small area. It's about rooting it in much wider context. But for a particular climate, in a particular place, I think you showed the Abaki project of Fathi in New Mexico, right? Fathi did this village in New Mexico, which he worked on. And the thing that they didn't realize, and he did a mugged earth village using the same techniques, the same people using to build domes and so on. But what they didn't realize, and what he didn't realize, by the way, is that the winters are very different from what Egypt is about. And those buildings didn't quite work the way it was. But he triggered off an imagination and presented an alternative, which I think me as a student at that time in the 60s, suddenly found there's an alternative to that conversation that was going on in the West. So it doesn't bother me that he wasn't totally faithful to the local, but because he changed the way we looked at a whole area of architecture, which is what makes him important, which is why I said the award is also important, because they changed the way there was a discourse of architecture to this wider use of discussion of architecture by the users, the clients, all the rest. So, but I think it's Fatih is an important example, and it was a great lesson to us, and remains so.
You want to use one of these standing ones? Or?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
We as historians of architecture can take our disagreement outside, so I'm not going to delve into the fact that I don't agree on your reading of the domes being the domes of the Aswan cemetery. Yeah. As a matter of fact, actually, it's worse than that if you are going to be a stickler for the place where he's getting his references from. His domes are actually from Mamluk domes of Cairo that do not use brick to start with. So you have to remember that the structural qualities of those domes of Aswan, and by the way, they're not of royals. We don't know who are the people buried there, but that's beside the point. I am also not at all bothered by the fact that he mixed and matched his references, partly because he actually was, and we have to contextualize that, he was working in an environment when he went to work for Doxiadis, which was between 1956 and 1960, it's because he was not in agreement with my namesake. Nasser of Egypt did not like him. He was an elitist, an aristocrat, and he left Egypt to go and work in Athens with Doxiadis. He designed fabulous villages for Iraq and for Syria, for Lebanon, for Pakistan, I think. They were in a modernist idiom. He came back to Egypt at the height of Pan-Arabism. So the place that he's thinking of is something that transcends, if you want, Upper Egypt. And he is probably yielding to some sort of political pressure. Maybe actually it was a compromise between Nasser and him to let him come back and practice and become the person that he was. There is a romanticism in his work. There is a huge amount of elitism in his work. Of course, actually, I mean, the guy is an aristocrat. He is from an aristocratic family, and his approach to alleviating the problem of the poor is to make them like himself. It's the model that he's looking at. So if you look at the plan of New Gurna, for example, he had an auditorium built in there, and everyone was jumping up in arms and saying, "How dare you?" But I mean, it seems to me that it's much more important to say, how dare I not? I am hoping that these villagers who are usually ignored and considered to be outside of the expectations of modern life might enjoy some theater. Even though everyone was saying, why are you building something that did not exist in their lives? So I am no defender of Fathi. I have supervised about 3 or 4 dissertations on Fathi. I have written 6 or 7 articles on Fathi, but I am a defender of Fathi as the prophet of vernacularism, exactly what Hassan is saying. He opened the way for others, and of course, actually, by critiquing him, others have been able to improve on how we approach the vernacular. But Fathi made it popular to go out and challenge modern architecture by saying there are other sources of inspiration that we can work with and create new and modern architecture with. His architecture is still a modern architecture.
Yes. To those very eloquent comments, I would just add that I've interviewed architects in Yemen and architects in Morocco who basically echoed what the two of you have said. How important Hassan Fatih was at providing an alternative model for what was happening in those decades. So.
The only architectural quote that I ever used that Lenin said was, "The proletariat can have colonnades too," which I think is, very important. Absolutely.
is Lenny?
Yes. Not a stupid guy. Maybe a little misguided.
Yes. You mean for the exhibit? Sorry. Yeah, but do we have time for any more questions? Okay. Okay. So I guess we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for coming and all your questions. And I want to turn this over for Lindsay, who's going to tell you a little bit about the exhibit opening and our next movements.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lindsay. I'm the current director of the Kaibel Gallery. First, thank you to our panelists for being here today, and thanks to the Aga Khan Award in Architecture for collaborating with the Kaibel Gallery on the current show, which displays the 6 winners from the 2022 cycle. And so we'd like to invite everyone here to a reception and the gallery opening. There's drinks and food, and the gallery has opened officially today to the new show, so join us now.